This is WPSL Port St. Lucie.
The opinions expressed are those of the host and guests of this program and are not necessarily those of station staff, management, or sponsors. WPSL does not endorse products that may be mentioned. Any reproduction or retransmission of this broadcast is strictly prohibited without written consent of WPSL. It's time to Ask a Rabbi. Call in with your questions and comments at 340-1590. And now, here's your host, Rabbi Shafir Lobb.
Hi there, and this is Rabbi Shafir Lobb on Ask a Rabbi. Happy Friday morning. So if you have any questions for me, please give me a call on 772-340-1590. And so I actually thought that I would continue, not what was on Ask a Lawyer, but a little bit on what we had talked about last week, which I'm going to take a little side bend on it, which is what is the Bible's view of non-consensual sex, which is actually kind of I think a little bit of an interesting topic. And the clearest reference to it, there's a couple of references that if a man and a woman are found together, what do you do with them? And the gist of it is if there's any chance that the woman was not consensual, it is presumed that she didn't consent. And it's also presumed that he grabbed her where she was not able to yell out. So that's kind of I think, an interesting viewpoint, right? Because it talks about whether or not the act occurs in a city and in an environment where she had potential to call out for help and didn't, or if in any way that ability to yell out was impaired or wouldn't have been heard. For example, if they're found in a field, it is presumed she did not consent, which is actually, it's kind of interesting.
If you're in a field, you can get up and walk away.
Not if you're being held.
But that would be then, at that moment, are you, I mean, you're saying found. Someone's coming up upon them.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the guy may have been holding her or may have forced her in some other way. Right? You don't know what all the threats might have been or what have you, but it's presumed to be non-consensual, which I think is kind of interesting, right? They give the benefit of the doubt, if you will, to the woman's status, which, kind of speaks to me that, and it's not surprising, right? These are ongoing problems of who decides to do what, who consents, who doesn't consent, who participates, who doesn't participate. And I kind of found that as an interesting sidebar. We talked a little bit about, you believe the person who is damaged by their testimony in the event that there's no other evidence. So those are kind of interesting. It's interesting that they took those judgments, right? That they even dealt with those issues and were able to discuss them. So I just think...
So technically, if she didn't belong with this person,
right,
she would be probably what type of consequences would there be?
Oh, it could
if she did consent.
If she had consented, it could be fatal, depending on whether.
Okay, then why wouldn't she always say that it wasn't consensual?
She might always say that, but there might have been cases where she would have been able to have gotten help, or there could have been some intervention. But if there isn't...
Because way back then, wouldn't it have been like you're with your mother and your father, and then you are with a husband? Women belonged to someone.
Oh, very often they were single.
Okay.
Like Dinah, right, goes out from Jacob's house and spends time with the girls. So she's clearly marriageable age because the prince of the local town takes her. And he falls in love with her after he's had sex with her, which is kind of an interesting scenario. And then he comes and he and his father come and ask Jacob for her hand in marriage, but she's already slept with him, and that was not consensual, right? But she, and Scripture isn't real clear about how she feels about it, which is kind of the interesting omission in that case. We don't hear what she thinks about it, but he falls in love with her. He falls in love with her and starts treating her tenderly, and Scripture goes into a little bit of description, mostly from his viewpoint, But Scripture tends to look at things from a male viewpoint. And so I find it interesting, right, that the presumption is that the woman is not consenting. So they knew something, right? And, and these are cases where both the guy and the gal might be stoned, depending on what's going on. And yes, they did have capital punishment to talk a little bit. So that kind of does get to the piece.
It was swift and
maybe not always as
harsh.
swift as it needed to be. There's a variety of different ways, but there's also protections against it. There's cities of refuge where a person can go and be safe, unless they're found to have committed murder, in which case the cities of refuge don't work. It's not that the state executes them in those cases, though. Usually it's the family of the person who was killed. And again, I think part of that speaks to an older culture where jails are not as easy. Certainly were not easy during the wandering years. Yeah, what are you going to do? Put bricks on a
even in some countries today.
Right, there's not a whole lot of prisons. We've got one of the largest, most extensive prison cultures on the planet, and that's big business. That's huge business in America.
But at least they have running water and food, opposed to some countries. So,
yeah,
prison's bad.
Prison's bad, and again, it varies. You're also sometimes dealing with cultures where it's not common to have running water. The older the culture, the less likely running water is going to be in a lot of places, because that's a newer technology. Running water came in fairly close to the beginning of America, right? So it was common to have water into the house much sooner. Not that it was in the very beginning. Certainly when New York was being built, right, people had outhouses in the backs of the apartment houses and things like that. And over time, we've moved the plumbing inside. And so, yes, so prisons tend to have plumbing inside. It might be an interesting research piece to see when water moved inside for prisons, right? And why and how. Certainly it's not necessarily pleasant. I mean, you've got an open head and everybody sees you and what have you, but depending on. But I also understand the challenges of secrecy in a group that uses secrecy to its advantage. So there's a lot of questions and issues associated, I think, with that. So getting back to a little more basic piece on it, what does it mean when Scriptures spends a lot of time getting into people's heads, right? Like the bitter water. If a woman, the text is kind of interesting. It says the woman either was or wasn't unfaithful, but it can't be proved, and the husband is jealous, right? And then there's a procedure to bring her to the temple, and that's the trial by bitter water. And that's, in a lot of ways, it's a psychological trial. Okay, because what happens there is that the woman is brought into the Holy of Holies. The man comes with the woman to the temple, and you can just imagine all the things that are going on in that process. He's bringing a very special sacrifice for this procedure that he's going to offer and basically give to the priests. And so they're going to recognize it the second he comes even close to the temple. They're going to probably see it from a distance. And they're separated, right? So he's taken somewhere off stage, and she is taken to the holy area, and her hair is loosened, right? So that's a sign of vulnerability if you unpin a woman's hair. And the priest takes water, fresh water, and puts a pinch of dirt from the bottom of the sanctuary into it. And he also writes some things and scrapes that into the water, right? And it's the blessings and the curses of if you've been guilty, this, and if you're not guilty, that. Now, I don't know about you, but do you think that water with a pinch of dirt in it is going to do anything?
No.
No. I don't think it did then either.
No.
Right. So the water is clearly not the test. Right. The test is the priest watching her.
But at the time, though, she believes the water would
I don't know.
Reveal.
Certainly I think some people may have thought that. There's a discussion later in Talmud about whether or not women knew that the water wasn't going to do anything. So the rabbis are not sure that the women don't know it. And the rabbis are not sure that women who are knowledgeable haven't read the text and know exactly what's going on. So, in which case the test loses a lot of its power. But yeah, you're right. So it's that fear that this could work that, is going to betray whether or not the woman's guilty or whether the man is just off the wall, jealous. And but the outcome of it is kind of interesting, right? If she survives the water, it means that she's innocent. What's going to happen if she isn't innocent is that her thighs are going to fall off and her belly's going to droop, and it's an ugly death. It's not even just death; it's an ugly death. Right? She's going to, but if she's innocent, then she'll be pregnant. Now, let's think about that one for a minute, right? If she's innocent, she's going to be pregnant. But if the man is zealous and hasn't been having sex with her, where does the baby come from? So
it almost seems as though they have it backwards. Because if she hasn't been faithful, that's not his baby.
Mm-hmm. That's what genetics would probably tell you, right? But it's going to be his baby because she's married to him.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so my take
and they've performed the test.
And they've performed the test, and so it really is in the water, right? The water makes her pregnant. But so my take on it, this is marriage counseling at the extreme. Right? This is, honey, if you've been unfaithful, stop it. Let's repair your marriage. Or find out what the issues are. And if he's been abusive, then hopefully they separate them. And but you never know. I'll share a little tidbit out of my early days.
Who decides to separate them?
I would think the priest would facilitate that.
And where would she go?
There are divorces way back when.
Okay.
There are records of divorces. I mean, Abraham divorces Hagar, and she goes off with Ishmael. Right, with her child or children. The text is not clear. And, it says one boy, but, we don't really. Again, CNN and Fox News were not there.
Yeah.
So we don't have video. My favorite comment about those things. But yeah, so Hagar is a divorced woman who goes off, raises a son, and he becomes great. So the Muslims would say that's because Abraham doesn't divorce her. He simply sets her up in one house and Esther and Sarah in the other because they can't get along. Mm-hmm. So you've got multiple wives that don't get along. Back in the days of polygamy in Utah, if the wives didn't get along, the guys had to make separate houses for them too. So that's, again, not an uncommon problem if you're going to have multiple wives. And so it goes on from there, but so divorce is not uncommon, but it's certainly harder to maintain a good life as a woman. But she's going to have some kind of profession, some way of making money or bringing money in, or she gets some kind of a stipend. But there are women who work even back then, and they do a number of things. They do different cooking and crafting, and there are prophetesses and things like that. So there are ways to make money if you need to. No, I'm not going to say that it was easy, and etc. Certainly Naomi. Well, Naomi's kind of an interesting case in the book of Ruth, right? She's poor, but she's got land. She's just cash poor, right? Her family's got land, and when Ruth gets married, she adopts the child, or that is her child. Right? Ruth's child is really Naomi's, because that's when she holds the baby up, and everybody says, "Yeah, that's your child." That's a declaration of, I may not have birthed this child, but it's mine. And that's because of Levirate marriage for the death of her husbands and sons. So she has a son as a result of Ruth marrying Boaz. So the first child is not Boaz's, it's Ruth's. And it's Ruth and her husband's, which is It has to do with the laws of inheritance, and that's what's behind Levirate marriage. So you've got a very different kind of culture that's going on and different stuff that's happening. So when the woman comes through this bitter water trial, then she could be pregnant, and it's not going to be an unfaithful thing. It's going to be because of the water. Right. So it's a way of giving her a clean slate to start over again, if that's the direction that's decided. And I'm going to guess that there was a lot of decision and talking and deciding, and, is he abusive? Is he not abusive? Is she abusive? Is she not abusive? I mentioned before that I was going to tell a story about when I was very young as a rabbi, or new rabbi, and I had gone to visit somebody in the hospital, and they were in the hospital partially because of a fight with their husband, who had injured them enough to put them in the hospital. And I'm talking with them about it. And, the comment was, well, yeah, he got kind of mad after I broke his arm. Yeah, that's kind of what I did. I went,
okay.
Would we like to talk about this some more? Right. Because the abuse is not always one way.
It almost seems like they're even.
They might be, and it was like, that was an eye-opener to me. That was, Yeah, exactly. Where do you go with this one?
Yeah.
Because it's a totally different...
How do you help them?
You obviously need to help them with anger management and with aggressive behaviors. And, neither one of you should be breaking the other one's arms or legs.
Yeah, or putting someone in the hospital.
Yeah. That's not what marriage is about. Marriage is not about an excuse to aggress against another human being.
Mm-hmm.
And, but there are people who...
My advice would be don't have children.
They had 3.
Wow.
Yeah. So, such is life, right? But that was an eye-opener for me, because here I am expecting that, he's the abuser in the system and she's the trapped woman. And I'm like, it's a little more complicated.
They're abusing each other.
They're abusing each other. And it was a very symbiotic, harmful, toxic relationship because of that. So the abuse was intertwined, and it was not resolved by the time I moved away. So, yeah, such are the joys of life.
And you hope the kids are all right.
I hope the kids come out okay. The odds are not good for that, by the way. The odds are not good for kids coming out of abusive environments to be healthy. And that gets back to that 10th command, one of the 10 commandments, where it says God takes into account to the 3rd and 4th generation. It takes a while and a lot of role modeling and a lot of other things happening to undo the damage when the damage is that severe. The damage done by exposure to violence, extreme violence to children, is huge. Right? It's huge. And, my psychology teaching, even more so, is like, wow, we really need to not pattern some of those things. We need to teach kids how to resolve differences respectfully, right? How to not take it to certainly not to a physical, but not even to an emotional or spiritual abusive level, because that's just hampering it's destroying part of the kid. It's not allowing the kid to develop the way they need to. It's not giving them the tools, because we learn so much by observation and by imitation. It's one of the primary ways that kids learn is what they see and hear when they're babies. And that learning starts, the brain growth from birth through the first couple of years is huge. That's just a really critical time for children. And, can you undo that damage? Yes, you can. Is it easy? Heck no. And the other challenge to that part is that very often the kids don't see any reason to change, because kids are born with the concept that what the parents are doing is working, because after all, it birthed them. So, it's faulty logic, but it's still logic, right? That's one of the really hard parts with dealing with people, is when they get into fallacies, it's still logical. It's just faulty logic, right? It's bad logic.
Well, that's like practice makes perfect is really not a good statement, because if you're practicing not perfectly, you're learning it
Right.
you
might be learning the error.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And boy, did I have, speaking of when I was a young rabbi, having that brought home to me, the very first student that I helped with a bat mitzvah celebration training, I'm still friends with the child and with, she's not a child anymore, she's got children, and with her mother. And I followed the habit of the times, and I made a tape for the young lady to learn her portion, to basically memorize it. And at her bat mitzvah, her mother turned to me and said, "She really mastered that well. She made all the same mistakes you made on the tape." Ooh. Yeah, and she was right. And I had heard them as well as she did them. And I was like, oh, so this is not, right? This is practicing the errors.
Yeah.
And, she was very diligent about it. And, so, yeah, I stopped making tapes right then and there. And I started really teaching the kids what are the skills, what does it take to really do it. Because the making a tape for a child is a lot easier on the teacher. You just make the tape, send the kid off to memorize it, and and who's going to know the difference? Well, the answer is the kid will down the road, and they're going to decide. This is the real danger of, and we've got a whole generation that learned first from records, then from cassettes, right? And then DVDs, and then kids are still learning. Some of them wrote from tapes and things like that.
Now they just Google it.
Well, they can Google it. They can certainly find it online. But that's, and I'm going to say that's a little bit different if your teacher gives it to you. They're an authority figure, and if they're handing it to you, they're saying that this is the way to learn.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is that the kid then understands that the religion is this little bit of recorded information that you blurt out and means nothing. And then we're wondering why we have unattached kids. That would be a big reason. And it's the same thing with teaching the test in public school. If all we do is teach the test, then what we're telling the kid is it doesn't matter how you get there. It matters only that you have
and that test
score.
Determines the teacher's and the faculty's future, not the child's.
Yeah, well.
Instead of giving them the information and the skills they need to go on in life,
correct,
we've taught them the test that keeps them employed.
Yeah. And we're already in the second and third generation of those teachers. So they don't, for them to break
they don't even
out
know
of
how
that,
to teach anymore because they're just teaching the test.
Right. That's exactly true. So it's a scary scenario that repeats itself and repeats itself. And yeah, pretty scary. So I'm going to take a moment here on the half hour to let you hear a little bit about our congregation. Congregation Eitz Chayim, your welcoming, inclusive, spiritual, and joyful Jewish home in Port St. Lucie. We welcome you to renew your inner Jew and join us. We are Reform Jewish with a renewal flair. We are multi-generational. We are welcoming to all. Come join us for a Friday night at 7:30 p.m. for our Kabbalat Shabbat services, or Stolen Moments on Saturday morning, where we discuss the Parsha of the week at 9:30 a.m. Shabbat morning services follow Stolen Moments, usually at around 10:30 a.m. Our address is 540 Northwest University, across from Met Stadium, and we are in Suite 102. Again, that's 540 Northwest University, Suite 102. Please join us for Friday nights at 7:30 p.m. or Shabbat morning starting at 9:30 a.m. for Stolen Moments. Congregation Eitz Chayim.
Tired of the same old tricks or treat? Looking for something fun to do this Halloween?
So if you're looking for fun, the place to go on October 27th is the Trunk or Treat by the Rainbow Assembly number 149, held at the Fort Pierce Masonic Lodge, 4590 Oleander. It's from 4 to 7, free admission. There'll be candy given out, games to play, face painting, all kinds of exciting things going on. A great trunk or treat for you, your family, and all the kids. The kid in you as well.
Now back to Ask a Rabbi here on WPSL Digital 1590, and back to your host, Rabbi Shafir Lobb.
Hi there. So this is Rabbi Shafir Lobb, and please give me a call at 772-340-1590. And I'm so glad that we had our expo and that is done. That was an exciting thing. I hope that the people who came enjoyed it as much as we did hosting it.
Was it first annual?
It was the first annual,
okay.
And we're already working on the second annual. Yes,
Yep.
It really is an annual, and we'll be getting out with some details here as soon as they get a little more firmed up. But we are starting to work on that already. So the second annual expo. We've got some other exciting things that we're planning. We are doing what's called a Taste of Judaism. So we'll be taking a look at spirituality and community and some other things that are important in Judaism. It's a set of 3 classes. The first one is Wednesday. I believe that Wednesday is the 24th. If that's a Wednesday, then I'm right. If that's not a Wednesday, then it's whatever is real
Wednesday
close
of
to
that week.
Wednesday of that week, right. It's the week before Halloween, and then we come back again the week after it in October, and then again in 2 weeks. So it's a 3-week program, but it's every other week. And then we'll be starting an Intro to Judaism course for those who might want to learn more. The Taste of Judaism, though, is open to everybody. There's no cost. We do ask that you make a reservation so we have handouts for everybody and have enough snacks for everyone to eat. And also know if we have to move to another venue if we get too big. So it's a great program. We're part of a national program with the Taste of Judaism. That's through Reform congregations throughout the country offer that, and it's it's open to everyone, seekers, folks that are married to a Jew, people who have any questions about what Judaism is. Each session is 2 hours, so it doesn't go. It's not a college course in Judaism, but it's a little bit about spirituality. It's a little bit about traditions and a little bit about those kinds of things. And it's another place where you get to ask a rabbi, because you'll be able to ask any questions that you have in that session, and hopefully we'll answer a lot of things for people. And hopefully you'll get a couple of snacks and join some food. That's never a bad thing with us. It won't be a huge meal, but it'll be some different tastes. And those are just some of the things that we have coming up. That is the Wednesdays of that week of October. I think it's the 24th. October 24th, and then November. I spoke it wrong. So it's the next to last Wednesday in October, and then the first and third Wednesdays in November. And they start at 7:30, and they will get out at 9:30. So still hopefully early enough for most folks. It's trying to balance that coming in after work but giving up an evening so that you can learn. You can come to one or all 3 sessions. They will be different. They'll be covering different topics. The first one is spirituality. So we invite you to come and join us for that. There's a lot more details on it on Facebook. It's a public event, so you can check that out there. And it isn't, I don't think, on our website yet. Maybe it is. I don't know. It might be, because I think both things are on the event page. But I will double check that, and if not, it'll get corrected. And you heard the ad about the trunk or treat, which is kind of a fun thing. I love trunk or treats. It's a fun way for kids to spend the holiday. So those are some of the up and coming things. And then the Intro to Judaism class will also be on Wednesdays. And that's an 18-week program. And so one is a lighter look, a more general look, and then the digging in and getting into more detail, whether you seek conversion or not. It also, the Intro to Judaism is also open to Jews who might want to learn more about their own Judaism. So lots of exciting things. And then in the spring, we're planning an an art fest, and we'll tell more about that as those things. So lots of exciting things. I can't tell you how happy I am. We're in our 4th year. I never dreamed that I would be starting a congregation in Port St. Lucie.
Mm-hmm.
That started thanks to a couple of things that happened a little over 3 years ago that kicked it off, and we just did our 4th High Holy Days service, and they're getting better and better every year. They just are. Love the music that we had. It was really nice, and Sharon has been watching on the live, and she was our cantorial soloist for part of the holiday, and we have a very participatory congregation. I do invite anybody to come and check us out. You don't have to be a member to come. You don't have to be Jewish to come and see what we're about. It's a loving, joyous community. We're multi-generational. And we've got a couple that are really little tiny ones that sit nicely. Some teenagers not quite so nicely. And then we've got, on up from there all the way into 80 and 80 plus. So I like that. I like the fact that the kids can see older folks still participating. I like that we have teenagers that participate on a regular basis. I think that's pretty awesome. Mm-hmm. And we've certainly got the young families, the older families, and then we've got the seniors. And that's a great function as a family when people can see the different generations participating in a congregation. I think that's the way it's been meant to be. And I like to think that at 4 years old, we're adding something to Port St. Lucie. There's my big commercial for us. Okay. So give me a question here, folks. After last week, I thought I'd be spoiled with questions. I guess I have to bring up people in the news. I will take 1 second, though, and I will extend our heartfelt prayers and hopes for the folks that have been struck by Michael or any other natural disaster, or any disaster for that matter. But certainly the folks in Michael's path. I know people who lost their homes on the Panhandle, and I can't begin to imagine what it would be like to lose all the things that I know insurance is not going to cover, that are not worth much except to me.
Yeah, that new fight begins.
Right.
Because insurance companies have not been like Johnny on the spot with checks for people.
No, they haven't been. They haven't been. Unfortunately, FEMA and all those others are not Johnny on the spot either.
But at least they're willing.
Well, at least they're...
I'm still fighting with my insurance company from Irma.
Yeah, right, so. Yeah. And there are other people who are fighting from Irma and from Matthew.
Sure.
And that doesn't even begin to describe the loss that isn't covered, which is if your job is destroyed. Right, or just the amount of lost work that you'll never recover, the cost of going to a hotel, all of that.
The evacuation costs.
Yeah, the evacuation costs. My nephew had 2 boats in Key West. He didn't come back to 2 boats. Right. And again, there's only so much that insurance covers. Even if you cover the full cost of the boat, you don't cover the loss of business, because Key West is just now starting to come back.
Sure. From Irma
for the just the tourist trade, right? Because you have to build.
Yeah, no one wants to vacation in a disaster area, right?
Right. When you've got torn down, hovels of buildings and piles of wood,
and beautiful palm trees aren't so beautiful with one leaf.
Yeah, no, if they're even vertical, right? The meme that was going around was, fall when the leaves come to the ground in Florida still attached to their trees. Right. So so there's all of this extra stuff that people, unless you've been through it, really have no perception of all the added extra pieces. And there's no way that temporary living is cheaper than living in the house that you're renting or owning. And if you don't have anything, you and the banker are going to have an argument, right? Hopefully most of it's covered by insurance. But, if my house, God forbid, were to depart Port St. Lucie for points unknown, this is going to sound really funky. Obviously there's the photographs and there's the cherished little trinkets, the little plastic Ferris wheel that I got with my parents in Vienna, at my mother's birthplace, because we went to the Riesenrad in Vienna, and we bought a little plastic thing that twirls. It's not worth anything, but
it's sentimental.
It's sentimental, and it would not survive being flung all over the countryside. Mm-hmm. And photographs. So there's those things.
I have mine in Rubbermaid, and when there's a storm, they go with me.
Well, you can only take so much.
I wish one of the things that just gets carried out.
Well, some things do, right? But I guess I'm guilty of having amassed too much, right? And I have downsized.
You need to prioritize.
Yeah, well, and for me that's a very easy prioritization, because it's the animals and the stuff I need to keep them alive for a period of time. Plus, my husband and me. So no, there wouldn't be as many of those things as I would want. And at one time I had this idea that if we ever needed to, we would just take the motorhome and depart. But right this particular minute, the motorhome would not be moving, because it's not moving. It needs some repairs. So, and with my luck, that would be, that would be when it would happen. So it would be what you could pile in the cars and go with. So I can't even begin to describe that, right? I'd lose that first set of dishes, and I'd lose my mother's crystal. There's not a lot of it, but there's enough that I can't really put in one tote and take. Mm-hmm. So I know what I hope that people did is grab something and, use it as the amalgam of the memories, because that's what you have to do. Or you're stuck looking at photos of the storm and using that as your memory keepsake.
Well, that'll be there for a while. I do remember after Francis and Jean, it like consumes you. It's all that's in your. It's all you talk about. It's all you. And it's a traumatic event.
Okay, as lightly as we were treated by Irma and Matthew, and here on the Treasure Coast, we actually lucked out on both of those two storms. Mm-hmm. Did they do some damage? Yeah. Were people without power for a while? Yeah. We were in my house for 20 hours now. Stuart, right, from Ask a Lawyer, he had, I think, 3 days that he was without power. And
he lucked out.
We lucked out, yeah. We lucked out a lot. And we have a generator.
Were you here for Francis and Jean?
No, I was not here for Francis and Jean.
Yeah, we lived through that.
Yeah. And I've heard some of the stories of the folks who lived through it, and so did Stuart. He lived through that. But my point is that even Matthew and Irma, as mild as they treated the area, people were in some kind of a weird place for, I would say, a good month, until things slowly started to come in and look. Yeah.
Well, we had that huge evacuation. I mean, it was,
that does it, and
preparing and then getting out there on the road.
Right, and the other thing, this is a subtle thing, but because we had folks in from Tucson who are like Sharon, who's our cantorial soloist, she came and saw it, and this is funny. Somebody's trying to call me. It's not a good time, folks, and. So, we had lowered the state, the county, the cities had lowered the lights along the road, right? So that happened. So there's all of these other things. And I moved here right after Isaac had hit Louisiana and part of here. And I remember traveling with the water right below the bottom of the road. I mean, it looked like you could touch it. Mm-hmm. And they were not back in their homes, but we were able to go down Highway 10. And so, people don't realize the secondary impacts. It's not just the storm blowing through and, it's over in a matter of hours. Yes, that part of it is.
So,
but then there's the recovery, and that's not instant. And so I have a Stuart on line 1. Okay, Stuart. Hello.
I'm not sure how you quite got onto the topic, because I had to take a call from my mother. But you're talking about the hurricanes, and you're right. I was here for Francis and Jean. That was my first experience with hurricanes.
Wow.
I will tell you the biggest problem is the psychic injury.
Yeah.
The fear, the emotional trauma of, I know with Francis, I stayed at my mother's in Boca, and when we came back, there was the National Guard blocking the exit on St. Lucie West Boulevard. And you had to show a driver's license to prove you lived in that area to get off the highway.
Yeah.
Because they did not want, people
St. Lucie County was closed, Stuart. Closed.
Yeah.
You're like,
Yeah.
how do you close? That's my home. I'm trying to go home.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so I go on St. Lucie West Boulevard and I see, Wendy's
I think
driving closer to my house, wondering, what am I going to find? It is traumatic. Now, I was lucky with Francis. Jean, not so lucky. I mean, nothing horrible, but, like we lost the bird cage, covering the pool, which insurance companies no longer will cover.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Yep, because a lot of people lose those.
Yeah. We had a 2x4 come through our den window into the den, so there was flooding. But we were home for Jean, and this was when my son was an infant, 2004. And I remember him and his mother in the laundry room, which was the only interior room in the house without windows, staying in the laundry room throughout the night while I stayed in the family room looking at the skylight and wondering if the skylight failed, the whole roof was going to come off the house.
Yeah.
And so that psychic fear lives with you. And then you live with the tarps on everybody else's roof for 2 years.
Yeah.
It's
and
bad.
campers in their front yard. The
Right,
little
I can
FEMA campers.
only imagine what the people in my...
Yeah, well, the early pictures of Michael show, just a house here and there that survived. And, the first, what struck me was that if, as you said, if any part of it failed, the house was gone. Right. Because the two choices are the house is either standing there and looking like, I've always been here, I'm here, no big deal. Now, obviously, we don't know if there's any internal water damage or anything like that in that house. But the other houses around it are down to the foundation. They're gone.
Well, their codes are completely different than here. I mean, our codes changed after...
Well, yeah, because we learned.
Yeah, finally.
We learned the hard way, or the same way that Galveston learned the hard way.
But even with Francis, I know when we got home, we saw the house from the exterior. The house was fine, no problem with the roof. And it was mostly fine inside, too. But, we had neighbors on the street that weren't so fine.
Yeah.
And that's how fickle the storm can be.
Oh, yeah. Well, even the last two storms, there were people in my neighborhood that lost fairly good chunks of their houses. They didn't lose their house, but they certainly had, the tarps and the assorted other things. I know that we had some fence damage, and because our dogs are old and don't do anything anymore, but walk outside 3 steps and do their stuff and come right back in. We didn't stress not having the fence. Now, if we had younger dogs, we'd have had to really deal with that issue. But it took a long time because the storm had sheared the posts that hold the fence up. So the fence itself was not hard to repair, but the sinking the
You were starting fresh, yeah.
It was worse than starting fresh because you had to dig up
the old ones.
The old ones, right? Because they're all below or you move it or something. But so there were parts of it that were starting fresh, and we were actually pretty lucky. The other thing that happened after the storm was the amount of mold and mildew that came up on the fence. That's
impressive. Where the Chinese drywall problem started in Florida.
Well, after Francis and Jean, people who weren't able to come back to their houses, who evacuated, who got all that water, their houses sat for 2 weeks wet.
Yeah.
And their drywall, my neighbors, ceilings fell and everything.
And there was insufficient drywall in the country.
Right.
And so a number of builders, perhaps not even knowing the problem, I have no reason to believe anybody did anything wrong on purpose, they ordered drywall from China. And tradition itself came to a grinding halt because of all the homes with Chinese drywall. Mm-hmm. The whole development of the tradition area, I think, stopped for more than 5 years and is just beginning now to redevelop again.
Okay, so I've always wondered exactly what happened with tradition.
That's when they.
I drive that back road all the time.
It was the timing of it. That's when it.
Right. There are some developments that every house had Chinese drywall, so people were afraid to buy in tradition.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Okay. Now I'm understanding.
So
it
was that whole. It was Francis and Jean and the people with damage, and then that new construction was all at the same time, and they.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Chinese drywall.
it really
drywall shortage.
It stressed the system, right? So there's those unexpected, unintended consequences of many different things, and this is going to sound a little funny. I come out of Tucson, and the worst that they have is a lot of sun.
It's hot.
It's hot, and it's hot every summer, and you know it, and. They I don't think would survive any major catastrophe like that because they're just not designed and built. They're just working now still on how to drain for the 6 times a year it rains, and the rivers run.
Yeah, I love Tucson.
It's a beautiful area.
Didn't Arizona just have a horrible flooding problem?
Wouldn't surprise me because if they get any water at all, the ground doesn't absorb it because it's so dry that it just runs. It runs off and it runs into the washes and into the rivers. The rivers don't run year round.
But I thought I heard on the news, like within the last month or so, that there was a part of Arizona that had as much rain in 1 week as they got in a year, and that there were rivers that were overflowing.
Let's say
so
Flagstaff.
So probably. I wouldn't think it would be Flagstaff. I would think it's somewhere
it's
lower.
Hilly,
but yeah.
It's hillier
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
So you would think that if
That
they
would
had
run off.
rain, it would run.
I know that Tucson, when it rains, you have to realize that a year's worth of rain in Tucson is 6 to 7 inches. We can get that in a weekend.
Sometimes we get that in like a couple hours.
Well, yeah, in a hurricane we get it right away. But and then there is flooding because the water here, the ground here won't absorb it either. But that's for a different reason. That's because the water table's right there. The water table's not that far underground in Arizona either, actually. It's pretty easy to drop a well down and get water.
Let me make one observation. If you drive around Florida, at least this part of Florida, I've noticed, and I didn't understand when I first came here, most of the houses are up on an elevation. Your front yard is sort of a little hill. And I never quite understood that.
It's to get them out of the floodplain.
That's the way the house try to prevent the house from flooding.
Right. It's to get the house out of the floodplain. They have to do that. Yeah. Actually, Tucson has that too. They have a floodplain because in rains it floods because the ground doesn't absorb it fast enough. The rain comes too fast. It doesn't come lightly and easily. And we used to joke at where I lived. We lived on Greenlee Street, and we used to joke about the River Greenlee. We would sit there in our house and watch the highway. the road, which is a little block road. It was nothing fancy, but it would be flowing in the rain, and it was like, I don't think I'm going to go anywhere today.
But it was designed to do that.
No.
Okay.
No. They actually, right before we moved, they came in and put in much better drainage, and they're backfitting that. So, how does that happen? Well, Tucson is a fairly old city, and again, prior technology was horses. They weren't as bothered by running water, right? Because if you're a big, couple 1,000-pound animal, then it takes a lot more water, and horses are smart enough to get out of it. Cows not, and those are things that you also learn, right? Where to put the animals when storms come. But Tucson comes to a screeching halt in the rain. First of all, everybody comes out and watches it, right? Because it's different. And I can remember going with Bill to watch the river. I've got video of the river running because the rain has been so
right. And river's there, but no water.
They're empty rivers. And the other time that they run is when the snow melts. So it's a different kind. Everybody's got their stuff. The thing that I noticed about Florida. Not that the houses, because that didn't surprise me, because Tucson also builds above the floodplain, because that's a code requirement. You're not allowed to build a house under the 100-year floodplain, because we're slowly learning that if you put people in the path of a disaster, the two will meet. That's not rocket science, right? We learned that in Katrina. If you put people in harm's way, they will get harmed. it won't happen every year, but it's going to happen. And when it happens in big numbers. So yeah, you're right. We build the houses up to get them out of the floodplain. And you get something out of the floodplain by building it up. And the other thing that I noticed in moving to Florida was all of the ditches to collect that water. There's a lot of water engineering that has gone into, but Port St. Lucie's a new town relatively. Right? For example, the hurricane that took out Galveston, huge hurricane. It came right across what would have been Port St. Lucie, took Lake Okeechobee and dumped it on the farms. The big damage in Florida was Lake Okeechobee, if you read the history. Phenomenal damage, but there weren't a lot of people in the path. Right? So the damage in Florida, although extensive and beyond incredible, doesn't get a lot of write-up because there weren't a lot of people. It was a lot of farms that were damaged and a lot of orchards. And then it went out into the Gulf, regained energy again, as we see with Michael. The Gulf is an even better hurricane feeder than almost anything else. And then it plowed into Galveston, just straight line across Florida, coming in right about here. Right about where you live, Stuart. And came right across and flew across Okeechobee and out the Tampa side, and just creamed into Galveston and created untold havoc there. And they learned from it, right? The survivors built a different city. They built a very different city. And the damage in Katrina was not so much the hurricane as it was the failed levees and the
too much water.
Well, it was
just too much water.
It was too much water, and and the standards were not kept. The codes were not kept. The Corps of Engineers didn't get to do all of their recommendations because they kept getting budget cuts. It's a classic story of money being rerouted and not ending up to take care of
protecting the people.
Right, protecting the people.
Yeah.
And Stuart, you can't see it, but on my live stream, Sharon says there's a Loper Lake in front of her house right now because I guess it's raining in Tucson right now. So, and she lives close to everybody in Tucson. Sharon lives right above the water table because that's just where you live unless you live in Oro or somewhere into the mountains. Mm-hmm. Then you're not going to be on the water table. You're going to have to deal with an underground stream coming up the mountain. And that happens too. Water's never far. It's surprising how close it is. But yeah, so that's the reason for the elevation. What's interesting here are all of the canals and how and where they drain.
Managing water in Florida.
Right, it is, and yet it contributes to red tide.
Yeah.
Right, and other algae blooms. And because people don't always think about all of the side effects. And there's always, Tanstaffel, there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. There's always, pay me now or pay me later. So if you don't put the money where it needs to be and do the work up front, you're going to get to do it somewhere on the backside, usually more catastrophically. And that's the engineer in me speaking. So maybe
they should have just left it alone to begin with.
Well, then...
But it's too late for that.
It's too late for that. We do live in Port St. Lucie. We've created a community here. And we're down to 1 minute. And I think I think we can do it. We just have to really learn, right? People didn't know about vibration before the Narrows Bridge did its swinging thing. Mm-hmm. So we learn, and that's what part of life was about. It's about learning from our challenges and creating a better life. So this is Rabbi Shafir Lobb for Ask a Rabbi on Digital 1590.
This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.